So far in this series, we've discussed political blunders and incompetence. Well, as this continues, Hideyoshi decides he's done with politics in this week's episode of Japan at War. At the beginning of 1592, Hideyoshi began the year on a hunt. He spent most of the month of January on this hunting expedition, most likely grieving due to the fact that his infant son, Tsurumatsu, had died in the fall of last year. After what ended up being 5 weeks, he returned to the capital in a European-style carriage, displaying his bountiful catch. Now that he was back in the capital, he could bring his intention to his invasion. At first, he had planned for his armies to set sail around April 12th, but this wasn't really reasonable anymore. See, getting all his forces positioned at Nagoya and then to the staging areas of Iki and Tsushima Island was more time-consuming than was first planned. So everything was pushed back to the 21st of April. Hideyoshi was also waiting to hear from Tsushima daimyo So Yoshitoshi, where the Koreans had changed their position and would stand aside and let his forces through the country. This would both avoid the costs of war and also allow him to focus on his real goal, China. Yoshitoshi hadn't really ever been totally honest with Hideyoshi though. See, he never told him that Korea had flatly said that they would never give him anything, and only told him things that he wanted to hear. Naturally, Hideyoshi believed So Yoshitoshi was still hard at work, convincing Korea to join them, but of course he wasn't. So knew war was inevitable, and he stayed on Tsushima and waited for Hideyoshi's patience to run out, and for the order that the invasion had begun. Another factor contributing to the delay in launching the invasion was Hideyoshi's own health. During the months of March and April, his eyes seemed to be failing him, and it caused a lot of discomfort, which prevented him from giving the required farewell report to the Emperor Go-Yozai before leaving to Nagoya. It seems like his eyes did get better in mid-April, and Hideyoshi did finally deliver his report. Then it happened. His patience had run out, and he dispatched orders on the 24th to proceed with the invasion. Hideyoshi, though, remained in Kyoto for at least 2 more weeks, supposedly spending time with his wife and concubines, but it's just as likely that his health was once again in decline, and he just wasn't up for the trip yet. It wasn't until May the 7th that he journeyed from the castle south to Nagoya. His departure was quite a big show and quite festive. Hideyoshi rode out on a white horse, wearing fancy armor, holding a sword in one hand and a bow in the other. His entourage was 77 armored samurai with gold-lacquered swords and spears. 66 banners were also present, symbolizing the 66 provinces of Japan. As Hideyoshi made his way from Kyoto to Nagoya, the Koreans were still struggling with their defensive preparations. They had fortified many of the towns, stocked the arsenals, and conscripted men, but not very much. After all, they still thought this would be nothing more than a large Waco raid. To give you some idea of how their work had been progressing, the government sent Generals Sin-Ip and Yi-il on different inspection tours in the spring of 1592. They returned to the capital a month later to deliver their reports. The only things they described were the conditions of the weapons in the armories, but nothing of the standing armies, their fighting capabilities, the reserve lists, or the conditions of the fortifications. Following the return of General Sin to the capital, Sin visited Easterner Yu Songyang to discuss defensive issues, in particular the military capabilities of the Japanese. Both realized war was coming. Yu asked the general if he thought the Japanese were strong or weak. General Sin wasn't worried, and this made Yu very angry. He believed that this was the wrong attitude and that their new matchlock guns made them very dangerous. Sin replied saying, even if they have firelocks, they can't hit anything with them. Once again, a Korean official was taking the threats too lightly, and the Eastern Party's words wasn't being listened to. It was now May 11th. On Korea's southern coast, Left Navy Commander, and soon to be quite the subject matter on his own, Yi Sun-shin was working tirelessly to prepare his command for war. And the task wasn't easy. For example, earlier in the year, he had received a report from the traveling High Commissioner stating that the port of Sudao was in great condition and recommended rewards for all the officers there. Not really. When Yi went to inspect the port, he found it to be a wreck and had all the men there beaten for punishment. Staff at the port of Pangtap also had to be beaten for their negligence. Corruption was a problem. May 22nd, the day dawned clear at Yi's home port of Yusu. The commander went down to War to test fire the new cannons that had just been installed in his newest vessel, the Turtle Ship. A staff officer for the traveling High Commissioner was also there for the demonstration. And in the afternoon, he practiced his skill with the bow. And the rest of the day passed uneventful. Back in Japan, Hideyoshi was nearing the southern tip of Honshu, still 2 weeks away from his headquarters in Nagoya. His orders were to proceed ahead of him, and the final preparations were being made. Contingents 1, 2, and 3 were now in place at the staging ground of Tsushima Island. The other 6 contingents were at Nagoya ready to follow. All that they were really waiting for was the wind to blow in the right direction. The first 3 contingents were led by Konishi Yukinaga, Kato Kiyomasa, and Karuta Nagamasa. Konishi Yukinaga, in his mid-30s, was the oldest of them. He was from a wealthy merchant family in Sakai, and had served Hideyoshi since 1582, and was eventually rewarded for his service with the Higo province. Like many of the Kyushu daimyo, Yukinaga was Christian. He had been baptized in 1583 and taken the new Christian name of Augustine, and was what many would say quite subservient to the Jesuit priests. In fact, many of the men in his contingent were also Christian, including Tsushima daimyo So Yoshitoshi, who had been baptized in 1590. His Christian name was Daria. Second contingent leader Kato Kiyomasa was 30 and had not been born wealthy. Instead, he was the son of a peasant from Hideyoshi's own village of Nakamura, and his mother was supposed to be a cousin of Hideyoshi's mother. His nickname growing up was Tiger. He was actually one of Hideyoshi's fiercest commanders, and one of my favorite samurai in history. Like Konishi, Kato had served Hideyoshi from the beginning, and was awarded a holding in central Honshu, then a new one in Higo next to Konishi's. The two pretty much actually followed the same career path, and ended up being trusted members of Hideyoshi's inner circle. The competition for Hideyoshi's ear was actually probably one of the biggest sources of tension between them. A second source was religion. See, Kato was a staunch Nichiren Buddhist and didn't trust the influence of the southern barbarian Jesuits. It should come to no surprise that all of his men were also Buddhists. The third contingent was led by Karuta Nagamasa, who was the youngest at 24. Kuruda was no stranger to battle though, and he had donned armor at the age of 9, fighting alongside his father in the Wars of Unification for Hideyoshi. He inherited the Kuroda domain in 1583. Like Konishi, he was also Christian and supported the works of the Jesuit priests. He went by the Christian name Daimyo. The three daimyo weren't exactly what you would call friendly to each other. Each was independent, ambitious, and eager for glory in the coming war. Konishi and his contingent would have a slight edge though, as they would be the first to cross to Korea and establish a beachhead at Busan. Once that was done, he was expected to wait for the other two to arrive before beginning the concerted push north to Seoul, each one by a different route. May 23rd, 1592. The day was clear, the sea was calm, and the wind was blowing perfectly. At 8 in the morning, the over 18,000 men began boarding the ships off the Tsushima beach. By noon, the ships were ready, the anchors raised, and they were on the way. The battleships that Hideyoshi had built were still 2 weeks away. But Konishi didn't care. Korea was right there, unknowing of what was headed their way. In just 7 hours, they would be there.